Jen, I know we've been covering a lot of cults recently, so I'm sorry, but today's episode is about a cult again. So I know we've talked about Korea, but because I didn't know about it and I think you don't know about it, just because we normally just talk about stuff that we find interesting anyways, I just wanted to talk about today's case a little bit. So in the early 1990s, around when we were born, so this is right when Lion King, Walkmans are on everyone's hip, everyone's just kind of making a resurgence into the digital world. In South Korea, it was widely heralded as a period of remarkable economic triumph. And there was this unprecedented growth. Everyone was achieving so much. However, when looking at it from the outside, it looked like everyone was doing so successful. Even now, a lot of people, instead of owning houses or anything, they spend a lot of their money buying designer goods. So looking from the outside in, it looked like a lot of people were doing better off than what they were. There was a lower rate of unemployment and poverty during this time. As much as 70% of the population belonged to middle class, and South Korea was often showcased as a model for extraordinary economic growth. However, this being said, under this kind of disguise of national success and prosperity, there was still a deeply disturbing counter-narrative that was growing. And this was being formed into a complex group known as the Chijon. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. If I'm not, we're just going to put a little blurb of what that just said over top of what I just said. That emerged between 1993 and 1994. Their actions would brutally expose deep-seated social tensions and grievances that simmered, particularly among those who felt left behind or unfairly treated by the system. The gang, ironically named Chijon, meaning supreme or most respected, was founded by Kim Gi-hwan, and there was a bunch of other former convicts and unemployed workers, and they all just kind of unified under this collective banner of hating the rich. They just wanted to see the rich burn. And this intense hatred and animosity turned into something unimaginable that would happen to several victims in today's case. Even though they had this rhetoric about exposing, financial gain, it would eventually catalyst into a bunch of acts of vengeance and sadism and murder, extortion, kidnapping, SA, and even cannibalism. So if you don't feel comfortable with those subjects, please check out another episode. The emergence of the kind of what they're called in our society is the MANSON family. You guys remember those, right? So essentially, this is South Korea's MANSON family, and we're going to get into what that is in today's case. Hi, and welcome to the Decomposing Flower podcast. We're excited to have you here with us as we delve into some truly intriguing and occasionally disturbing true crime cases. Today's case is no exception to that. I'm your host, Kira, and with me is Jen. Everything we say in our podcast is information that we have gathered from testimonies, interviews, documents, and trustful sources. Any opinion we say is our own opinion. If we get any information wrong, please feel free to let us know in the comments. Also, start a discussion down there. We love hearing your guys' comments, as well as in our description, there is a Google suggestion that you can recommend cases to us if you want to hear something particularly on this channel. It's more like a conversation anyways. So with that being said, we mean no disrespect to the victims or anyone affected by this case. Today we're going to be discussing the Chijon family. And like I said, there's going to be talkings of murder, SA, cannibalism. So if you find that triggering, please check out another one of our episodes. Be safe and make sure you take care of yourself. Go pet a dog or a cat. With that being said, we're going to get into today's episode. So remember when I said this all started with one guy, Kim Gi-hwan? Gi-hwan?
Yes.
Sorry. So basically, he kind of lived a good life from what I kind of discovered. So, despite being a top student, his academic journey was cut short when his family's financial struggles eventually forced him to leave middle school at the age of 13. He was forced to go into manual labor in order to help keep food on the table and support his family. And all of a sudden, he was thrusted, like this is a 13-year-old child, into an adult world very, very quickly. And his thoughts around this time was not good. He thought a lot about committing heinous acts, as he was particularly triggered by news reports about corruption in university, particularly talking about their entrance exams. Because allegedly, what was happening at a lot of the time was if you had money and maybe your grades weren't so good, you can maybe pay someone and then all of a sudden you're in. Essentially, if you had money, you had a way in. And Gi-hwan, looking at this, was pretty pissed off because that was his goal, his chance in life, and it was taken away from him. So it wasn't solely directed at wealth itself, his anger, but kind of any wealth that was perceived to be acquired or maintained through unfair or corrupt means. So basically, like if you were a construction worker and you worked 80 hours every single week and you worked hard for your money, the gang wasn't supposed to be mad at you. It was supposed to be at like Nepo babies or like people who just kind of woke up one day and they're like, hey, I'm in my bed of money and life is so hard, you know? People like that. People that didn't work for it, that didn't understand how, you know, someone in poverty might feel. And so it's important to remember this kind of economic miracle that Korea was experiencing wasn't positive for everyone. Like I said, 70% of the population was mostly employed, but there was varying difference in there, and it caused a lot of riff as we kind of move on. So Kim Gi-hwan was a 26-year-old, and he had been working in kind of like this construction factory, working with like shoe and plywood. In that summer of 1993, he met with another person named Moon Song-ruk. Moon Song-ruk, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. He was also 23. Song-ruk had already 3 prior convictions, and then they also met with another person named Kim Hyung-yang, who was 22 at a poker game. It was this very encounter that Kim Gi-hwan openly articulated his hatred for the wealth, and Song-ruk and Hyun-yang kind of resonated with what he said. That very evening, they left the poker game and had more in-depth conversation. They kind of sat down and just said, you know, we really need to do something about this. This isn't right. Like, we should really make a statement and do something about it. So that's just what they did. They established, at the time, it wasn't quite a gang. It was more like a group, but eventually it would become to be a gang. And they made a doctrine. In the subsequent weeks, they systematically kind of met with more people, recruiting individuals from construction sites who shared similar backgrounds. You know, they were kids that had to go into the adult world too quickly, or university students that never got their chance. It was all a mixed bag of people who had just been slighted by the system. And there were 2 more individuals named Kang Dong-un, who was 21. He had 2 prior larceny convictions. Might have mispronounced that, Byung-ok, who was 20. He had 2 prior robbery convictions, and there were a bunch of other perpetrators, but this might just be like a little bit too many names going on. But there was Kang Moon Sub, 20, and Song Bon-un, who was 18. All these male members had a history of working in construction or factories. Later on, Lee Kyung-suk, who was 23, she was the first woman, and Kang Dong-un paid off all her debts and suggested that she better stay with them. And there was a significant dependency that would prove significant later on. So keep this in mind. Now, I mentioned the doctrine, right? So there were some fundamental principles to this group, much like you're going through Facebook and you're trying to join a new group, but there's rules. Number 1 was, we hate the rich. Number 2, a traitor to the group must be killed. Number 3, don't trust women, not even your mother. This was weird, as they called themselves a family, yet they really, really fucking hated women. And we'll get into that because it's deeply horrifying. Everything was very, it was deeply dysfunctional, but it wasn't at the same time, because everyone would just kind of bonded over their similar hatred of everything. It was very dehumanizing how they would look at other people. So in order to fund their operations, at the time, all 7 members pooled together their finances and acquired an arsenal. This arsenal included 2 vehicles, dynamite, and that's something they used a lot, 17 weapons, including 6 rifles, a pistol, an air gun, a military sword, a hunting knife, and an electric prod. They also had walkie-talkies, like they're on some kind of spy mission. It gets wild, because they also constructed an incineration facility and 3 prison cells in the basement of their secluded hideout.
Holy shit.
I know. Their ultimate objective was to accumulate 1 billion won, which is approximately like $1,250,000 at the time in like the 1990s, through kidnapping and extortion of the wealthy individuals that they would collect and put in these prison cells and torture them. In order to prepare for this, though, they had to go through rigorous training, including hiking and camping. Oh, so rigorous. I don't know if you're kind of thinking about like training for like a kung fu movie, but they all like camped out on like this mountain, and that was their training. But they also received detailed lessons on how to handle dynamite and execute kidnappings. Like they would run practice kidnappings. Let's get into what the first act of violence truly was. Their first recorded murder was, quote unquote, a practice act. So they were just trying out murder for the first time, just dipping the toes in, just seeing if it works or not. It occurred on July 18th, 1993, when they abducted Miss Choi, who was 20 years old. She was a farmer's daughter, and they kidnapped her from underneath a train bridge. Now, I just want to make a quick side note here. They hated the rich, but this was a farmer's daughter. So, like, what the fuck? But she was a woman, so it's all good. We can kill her. So they transported her to a remote hill where she was gang essayed. And in a demonstration of their intent, Kim Gi-hwan choked her to death. And at the time, people reported him saying, "This is how you kill a person." The gang dismissed her as not wealthy, and kind of, again, relating to my point, she's not wealthy, so why? Her body was later discovered by a villager, and it just gets darker from here. Their internal dynamic was just as disgusting as their external actions. So not even a year later, this happened in August, so literally 2 months later, Song Bong-yoon, who was the youngest member, remember the 18-year-old? He was responsible for managing their funds. He attempted to escape with 3 million won. True to their rules, remember? Number 2, a traitor in the group must be killed. The remaining members tracked him down to a relative's house in Shanghyeon, where they dragged him to a secluded area near the incineration facility and executed him in executioner style with a bullet to his head. This is important to remember, but they also killed and ate a dog at the same location. So this act of consuming animal flesh along with a murder kind of happens maybe a little bit again, and we'll get into that. So their actions didn't end there. They wanted to get 1 billion won. How are they going to do that? They need to do another abduction. So they found Lee Jung-soo, who was a 27 cafe worker, and her 34-year-old musician boyfriend on September 8th of 1994 around 3 a.m. They targeted them because the musician was driving a Hyundai Grandeur, which they took as a sign of wealth. And so the gang persuaded them, trapping their car between their pickup truck and a Daewoo Le Mans. They incapacitated the boyfriend with a gas gun, then stabbed and brutally beat both victims. Despite the car alarm, no one was around. No one heard this happen. The couple was bound with tape and taken to the hidden incineration facility, locked prisons. A gang member offered Lee Jung-soo milk and bread, remarking at the time, "You have to have known real hunger in order to know how precious a drop of milk is." So it's funny because, okay, so this is the way I kind of take what he's saying, is he's making fun of her and like giving her this glass of milk and being like, "Oh, you must not have ever like hungered for this milk before. Like you don't know what it is to starve," to her. And so later on they realized the couple was not wealthy, and the gang decided to kill the boyfriend painlessly, but to ensure Lee Jung-soo's complicity and prevent her from reporting them, they forced her to participate in the murder of her own boyfriend. After making him drink liquor, Lee was compelled to place plastic wrap over his head and suffocate him. Kim Gi-hwan, however, interjected in this whole thing and persuaded the gang to spare her life, but they did murder him. The gang then transported the boyfriend's body to a cliff, placing him on the driver's side seat of the car, and then pushed the car off, deliberately leaving skid marks to stage it as a drunk driving accident. It's really gross, but they also essayed Lee at the same time as all this was happening at the same location. And true to the staging of what the gang did, the police initially considered that the musician's death was an accident. And this is really important because the police really dropped the ball on this case. This is only the first of many failures that allowed the gang to continue their spree. The pinnacle of their crime spree came on September 13th, 1994, just before a big holiday, where they kidnapped Mr. Seo, who was a 42-year-old factory owner, and his wife, Mrs. Park, while they were weeding a family grave. The couple was taken to the incineration facility. The gang demanded 100 million won, but Mr. Seo could only offer 80 million, which was intended for his factory workers and maintenance. Mrs. Park was held hostage while Mr. Seo was sent to retrieve the money. He arranged for a worker to deliver the funds, and the worker went to the police. However, this is just a massive fuck up here, but due to jurisdictional issues, the case was misdirected to some Gyeongju police station, and they dismissed this whole case as a ruse to cover up financial problems. They're like, "Oh, you have to give away 80 million won? Someone's stealing that? No, you guys are lying." And they didn't even look into it. So, despite receiving the money, the gang forced Lee Jung-soo, because she was still a captive at this time, and she was terrified because she also thought that she committed a murder, and the whole time the gang is essaying her and treating her worse than dog shit, to be honest, because remember, women are garbage in the eyes of the gang. So they forced her to shoot Mr. Seo and Mrs. Park in the head with an air gun. And to escalate the situation, they ate parts of the victims' bodies and forced Lee Jung-soo to eat the liver. Yeah. One gang member later confessed to dismembering the victims and eating their flesh, claiming it was to boost his courage and renounce his humanity. This act of cannibalism was kind of to symbolize their power and dominance over this society that was holding them down. Like, it's giving Joker, like, oh, we live in a society. Like, what the fuck? To mask the smell of the incineration, they held a barbecue in front of the facility, offering pork to the local villagers, and I really hope it was pork. So they were feeling really good because they got away with murder several times now, kidnapping. They just got 80 million won. Like, they're living good. The gang thought, though, they needed a more efficient way to identify wealthy victims. I mean, 1 out of 3. And I just want to go back to their doctorate again. They're only trying to kill the, like, Nepo babies, not the people that worked hard, not the people like Mr. Seo and Miss Park. So, like, what the fuck even is this gang? So, in order to better identify wealthy victims, they got a mailing list that contained the names of like 1,200 of Seoul's exclusive Hyundai department store's best credit card customers. And they got this through a disgruntled worker who was pretty pissed off with the situation as well. This worker was subsequently arrested after the gang eventually was captured. So you're probably thinking, holy shit, how does this end? Like, this is disgusting. It needs to come to a stop. Eventually it did, as Lee Jung-soo had an extraordinary act of courage one day. The turning point arrived on September 16th, 1994. During a dynamite practice session intended for a planned prison break, if they ever got in prison, both Lee Jung-soo and Kim Hyung-young sustained burns and required hospital treatment. While in the waiting room, Kim Gi-hwan tested her loyalty. Chillingly, he asked if Lee wanted to run away, and he gave her money and was like, yeah, if you want to run away, you can. I'm not stopping you. So when a nurse called Kim into the examination room, Lee didn't miss a beat. She ran, and she ran fast. She took a taxi and then arranged for a rental car while hiding in a vineyard. And like the whole time, she's terrified. The gang is able to kind of track this taxi down as well. So it's just a terrifying situation. So then she took another taxi, and then she eventually ended up in Seoul. She was overwhelmed with her trauma from the situation. Lee initially was too terrified to go to the police, as she thought she was a criminal. She was hiding in a motel, and from there, she called a male friend and told him the whole situation. And they then, from there, the male friend went to the Seocho, I might have mispronounced that, police station, and told the whole situation. Eventually, she came to the police station herself, but this was overwhelming. The gang had beat her and essayed her. They didn't believe this at all. In fact, they thought she was under drugs. They checked her for needle marks along her elbows, like her elbow pits. I don't know what you call that area. However, luckily, someone had some common sense. As chief criminal investigator Gyo Byung-chung. So, luckily, Gyo Byung-chung made the critical connection and recognized that this lady was traumatized. This lady could have been telling the truth. We need to investigate and find out and do our jobs. So Lee was describing very specific details of the case that had not been disclosed to the public. She told that there was this missing married couple, Mr. So and Mrs. Park, and they were able to connect her testimony to the missing persons case, and eventually this whole thing kind of blew open. Unaware that Lee Jung-soo had reported them, though, the gang continued their operations. They monitored the police department and observed that there was no kind of search efforts happening for them, so they thought they were okay. Meanwhile, though, the police meticulously were tracing Mr. Xiao's phone, locating it in Yongwang County. This precisely collaborated with Lee's testimony, and in the early morning, so exactly the next day, September 17th, they went to Jiangsu, I think I pronounced that right, where her boyfriend's car had been pushed off a cliff, further confirming her story. And then on September 19th, they waited at a gang member's Kyang Dong-eun's apartment and arrested him as soon as he arrived. They then employed a clever ruse, contacting the remaining gang members and pretending Kyang had been in a serious hospital accident. So all the gang members rushed to the hospital. They're like, "Oh no, is he okay?" And they were all arrested at the hospital. Following the capture, the broker who had supplied them dynamite and firearms was also apprehended. So that's just another note. So the capture happened and they were all sentenced pretty dang quickly. On November 1st of 1994, so this was only 6 weeks after they were apprehended, all the members of the Chijon family, with the exception of Lee Kyung-suk, was sentenced for the murders of 5 people. Lee, who was not directly involved in any of the murders, was solely convicted of fleeing a crime scene. A striking and disturbing detail that happened after their sentence, Kim Gi-hwan made a statement to reporters before his trial, stating that his only regret was having not killed more wealthy individuals. So the public was pissed, and they demanded retribution. Like, this guy is guilty to his gills. So over a year later, November 2nd of 1995, all the members, excluding Lee, were executed at Seoul Detention Center. This was not an isolated event. It was part of a larger coordinated execution day where 19 other violent criminals were murdered, which is also another killer, mass murderer, Oh Byung-hyun, who we might talk about, was also put to death. And there was a lot of backlash, specifically towards the justice system regarding this case. There was a lot of intense kind of media scrutiny about how fast this all happened as well, because they just wanted immediate justice so quickly. Like, normally people are on death row for a little bit, but this was also probably accentuated by the influence of the media coverage of the whole gang. So they sent shockwaves through the South Korean society. There was a pretty big impact from what this gang did. The media covered the gang's acts as a death cult fueled by vengeance and sadism, and described it as depravity in its purest form. Citizens voiced complaints against the spike of serial murder in the country, which also uncovered Oh Byung-hyun's crime spree in the same month and year, September 1994, which also involved a bunch of essays and murder, intense childhood issues, and this dissatisfaction. There was a tendency to rationalize their own failures by blaming society. That's kind of where we're at in today's case, and we'll see you in the next episode.